Hello and welcome to this video on how to pass the Level 3 CFA exam. My name is Stuart Jackerman. I'm very happy to be here today. I'm part of the Level 3 tutor team here at Kaplan Schweser. And just to give a bit of background on myself, I've been training towards the CFA exam and Level 3 in particular for about 12 years now. Prior to that I was on the buy side in the investment management industry for about 10 years. But yes, the last 12 years I've spent dedicated towards training students to pass the Level 3 exam. And we are here today for me to give you lots of direction and hints and guidance as to what the most productive way is for you to approach this final stage of your CFA program and how to maximize the chances of your success. I guess the first thing I should say is congratulations. If you're here watching this video, it's probably at the start of your Level 3 journey. That means, of course, you've cleared the dreaded Level 2. So congratulations, that is no mean feat. But first word of warning and first piece of advice, do not kick back and take Level 3 for granted. I don't want to be the bringer of doom and gloom, but that might be one of the reasons why the Level 3 pass rates are still down in the 50s. The number of people that get through Level 3 is not a vast majority. It's still down in the 50s, mid-50s. And you might sort of wonder at this stage, well, if Level 2 is commonly known as the most difficult challenge, and in many ways it is, how come these people that pass Level 2 don't go on and just automatically grant themselves Level 3? Well, that's why we're here today. That's why you're watching this video. It's part of the reason why you're watching this video is we're going to talk about the pitfalls of Level 3 because they still exist. And if you, if you take Level 3 for granted, if you kind of think I've earned my Level 2 spurs, therefore I deserve Level 3, all I need to do is turn up and sign my name, you might not get the result. You're not. Let's put it this way, you're not going to get the result that you want. But good news, the good news is that the fact that you are here means that you've cleared Level 1 and Level 2. The fact that you're here, it means that you know what it takes to clear a level, to pass a level of the CFA exam. And the good news is if you repeat the application, the hard work, if you repeat the heavy question practice, and the dedication that you've shown to get where you are right now, the chances of you getting the result that you want at Level 3 are very, very high. The important thing with all of the CFA exams really is to make sure that all of the time you put in, you get rewarded for it. You get, as I call it, you get paid. You get paid, you put the time in, and you earn a return on that investment. That's a very important concept. So that's the other thing we're going to focus on today. What is the most productive way for you to prepare for the Level 3 exam? And I guess a focus on the pitfalls, because we can define what's productive. A lot of the, if you like, a lot of things that are productive are really the negative of don't do these things that are counterproductive. In other words, don't waste time doing certain things. So we can focus on the pitfalls as well. So that's the general idea. You can see the content here for this video. It's not going to be the longest video that you'll watch in your studies, but we're going to talk about, we've already mentioned the pass rates. We're going to talk about what people say about the Level 3 exam. We're going to talk about the key differences between Level 3 and the previous two levels. Some of you will already be aware that Level 3 is very different in the way it's tested. Certainly the first paper is, the morning paper is. And we'll talk about what that difference is and how you go about adapting to the new technique. This is the key thing about Level 3 is in the morning paper you're going to need a new technique. So we're also going to talk about your productivity levels, as we've said. What's the most productive thing for you to be doing? A lot of this stuff will echo with the advice that you had at Level 1 and Level 2. Good advice, given that you're here. Yeah, survivorship bias, that you're here. It was good advice that you took. And we're going to repeat a lot of that good advice just to reinforce it for you. But you do kind of know it already if you're back here for Level 3. We'll also talk about how Schweser can help you, Kaplan Schweser can help you with your exam. That's a big part of the reason why we're here as well. So I've already said congratulations. That's the first thing I had to say to you. A vast majority of delegates don't actually make it to level 3. We estimate here at Kaplan Schweser that only about 25 to 35% of candidates actually reach level 3 and give it a go. And that is because, of course, the pass rates for previous levels are so low. The pass rate for level 1 is around about 40%. You can have a look at the pass rates that are out there. They are public information, but they're around about the 40% level. That's the number of people that take the exam that go on to pass it. So it's less than half. And it's less than half for level 2 as well. 45-ish%. You're looking at 40% of people clearing level 1, 45% of people clearing level 2. All right, so you're there right down in the sort of 20s already with regards to people that might do it first time. But of course people might have success at a second attempt. So that's why we estimate only about a quarter to 35% of delegates actually get through to reach level 3. And here it is. And the pass rate, what I'm writing here is pass rates. The pass rates for level 3, they are higher. I did mention earlier that the level 3 pass rate is slightly higher. But it might be lower than you expect. It certainly is lower than you might expect, like I say, if you kind of think that your level 2 spurs are going to get you through level 3 without any serious application. All right. One of the things that I'm going to point out is that for me, level 1, you can see in these kind of graphics here that we've summarized what you were really asked to do at these different levels. So level 1, there's a lot of memorization, learning definitions, learning basic relationships, learning key ideas and fundamental theories of financial markets, and applying what they call factoids here. There was a lot of recall required in the exam and quite a lot of rote memorization. And the gradient there was quite steep for delegates that were meeting this stuff for the first time. At level 2, the definitions were done, but I think it's generally correct that level 2, I think, is the hardest challenge. It is the most technically demanding challenge. What you're asked to do there at level 2 is to really deep dive into some more technical areas. So there's learning, there's recalling, but there's a bit more applying going on there. And of course, the questions are a little bit more tricky to navigate. You'll remember at level 2 that level 2 came at you in that item set format. And that is that you had a vignette, a block of text that was from, on average 1.5 pages long, and you had to answer either 4 or 6 questions on that text. Now, what you were being tested on there was the A in CFA, the analyst side of things, the way they were presenting that information, the ability to look at a lot of information, some of it relevant, some of it not so relevant, and really sort of cut through it and pick out the salient and important points. That is going to play a role in your level 3 as well, but it's going to be more of a role in your level 3. Level 3, you can see the word apply here is in huge letters. It's all applied at level 3. It's all based on case studies that are in front of you. Everything at level 3, or a vast majority of the exam, is really looking at a case that's in front of you. An investment management situation, a client that wants to achieve something, or at least maybe you want to assess what the client needs to achieve. And there's different types of clients. There's individual clients, there's institutional clients, and there's different steps in this process of helping them achieve their goal. That's what level 3 is about. Level 3 is about putting together the knowledge that you have gained at level 1 and level 2 and applying it to the situation that is in front of you. So it's not so much about recalling basic facts to get your marks here. It's more about using what you've got in the level 3 curriculum, looking at the case in front of you and making sure that you answer the question. This is kind of the three-pronged approach to having success with your level 3 technique. It's very much case-driven at level 3. And for those people that struggle at level 3, those people haven't got their technique quite right because they're not addressing the case in front of them. They're not responding to what's in front of them. They're not playing the question that's in front of them. They're trying to shoehorn what they think onto the case that's in front of them. That's a classic poor exam technique. It's a classic example of poor exam technique. The other thing that, of course, is different at level 3 is that the morning is written. All right, that's the other thing that is different at level 3. The morning is a written paper, okay? So it's called constructed response. What it means is you're going to have to pick up your pen and you're going to have to actually write a response to the examiner in the exam. All right, so that's new. And that does cause a lot of issues. When people struggle with level 3, they struggle with their technique in the morning paper. It's only the morning that is written. The afternoon is going to be multiple choice, MCQs, multiple choice questions. It's going to be item sets, like your level 2 format. All right, like level 2. Now, everybody focuses on the morning paper being different. Everybody focuses on the constructed response stuff. And then people kind of forget that the afternoon is going to be tricky. Because level 2 was tricky, right? The afternoon is going to be in item set format. It is going to be tricky. So don't, in your preparations, don't overweight. Clearly, we've got to get comfortable with what this new style of question is. Okay, but don't neglect the fact that you are going to have a whole 3 hours in the afternoon that are questions that come at you in this item set format, the vignette with 4 to 6 questions following it. The other thing that's different at level 3 is that the morning paper, just the morning paper, is published. All right, it's a matter of public record. The CFA Institute publishes that paper, and it's something that you can see. The last 3 years is usually on the CFA website. That is subject to change, and obviously we can't control what they put on their website. But as a level 3 delegate, you can usually see the last 3 years of paper, last 3 years of level 3 morning papers. And that is gold, isn't it? Because for the first time at level 3, you can actually see what happened in the exam. So whilst the constructed response is new, and it might seem like new is kind of unknown, it's not like that. Actually, this new thing is very, very known, because we've seen it. And like part of our job here at Kaplan Schweser is to really pass on to you the essence of the sort of thing that you'll get asked in that morning paper and the sort of response that the examiner is looking for, and to guide you away from poor exam technique, which we'll get onto later in this video. And of course you'll get lots of instruction on that as you go through your question practice through your Schweser program, later on in your Schweser program. So yes, we'll talk a bit more about the constructed response later on. I know you're dying to know all about it, but it's really something that you kind of get used to the more time you spend looking at questions, really. It's not for me here now to say, hey, guess what, it is like this, and to really convey that essence. It's really something that you experience as you look at lots of questions and you start to pick up and take on board the ideas and the style. But, you've already been here. If you've got through level 2, you might remember the first time you did a level 2 item set. You might remember that. You might remember that because it was probably the most harrowing memory. Picking up that first level 2 item set, that first level 2 vignette, and thinking, what am I going to do for 18 minutes here? And you do it all wrong, didn't you? Do you remember? You probably did, all right? You probably sat there and read it, wasted time, and you were 10 minutes in before you even started addressing the questions. So, take heart from the fact that you had very poor item set technique at the start of level 2. You took on board guidance, did lots of question practice, and you got the result that you needed. Your technique was enhanced through applying the points that we make in classes. And you can do the same for these constructed response questions at level 3. All right. Here's a word that I haven't used yet. Essay. I'm going to ban the word essay from any discussion, all right, about the level 3 morning paper, because that's a myth. That's a, if you like, that is a kind of an urban myth. That's fake news. That there's any essays going on in the morning paper, there isn't. And in fact, anybody that writes an essay is very likely to not be very successful at level 3. All right, these questions are not, credit crunch, discuss, 40 minutes. That's just not what happens. They're very targeted questions. And, go back in time, the CFA exam did used to be quite open-ended and quite discussional. Might not even have, an answer. It's more of a philosophical question to see what the delegate's response is. But these days, it's not like that. These days, it's very targeted, it's very granular, it's very explicit. The examiner reaches out, grabs your hand, takes you to a point in the case, really, and says, what do you think? What should we do? Should we, is this a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Which one of these should we pick? What is the most appropriate thing? What does this client need to do? Pick out of these 3 or 4 things what would be most appropriate for this client in this situation. It's that sort of idea that's happening. It's very focused. It's not what you're worrying about right now as you're moving into level 3, and that is, crikey, I'm going to have to get my quill out and I'm going to have to write my memoirs. You're not going to do that. Anyone that does that is not going to have a lot of success at level 3. All right, so the curriculum, you're going to see a lot of old friends in the level 3 curriculum, because you're going to see a lot of ideas that you've met before. You're going to see ethics is going to be there, all right? There's an old friend. GIPS is there. That's the Global Investment Performance Standards of the CFA Institute. This is new, though, Behavioural Finance, BF. Behavioural finance is the psychology of investing. Yes, it is thinking about how we actually behave rather than how some sort of theoretical model says we should behave if we were sort of machines. Of course, we are organic, emotional beasts that make mistakes, and if we all make mistakes in the same way, that could lead to certain, certain results in financial markets that can be explained by psychology or our ability to think or otherwise, rather than traditional finance models like CAPM, Markovitz's Efficient Frontier, that sort of thing. So that's really interesting. I remember my CFA program, and that was a real highlight for me, the behavioural finance stuff, because for the first time, I actually went back to my office and I thought, right, I kind of understand a little bit more about what's going on here, because you can't take the human emotion out of investing. Well, you can try, but it's very, very difficult to do so. So ethics, GIPS and behavioural finance, they're there. We can give you lots of guidance through the CFA program as to what gets tested where. So for example, I could say to you when we get to these sections later on that ethics traditionally has been tested in the afternoon. It hasn't featured in the morning. Might be a few people wiping their brow there, but you never know, that could change. Behavioural finance has featured quite heavily in the morning. Tends to get about 10 to 15 minutes in the morning of your 3-hour exam. And you've really got to play the exam at level 3. If you know, this will come through when you do your studying later on, but if you know the key ideas the examiner wants you to know and you apply them to the case, very often the answer is a lot more straightforward than you might worry about when you're reading through the curriculum. But that's kind of the starting point. Ethics, GIPS and behavioural finance is right at the start of the curriculum. Then you've got economic analysis. Well, they call it economic analysis. This is actually referred to as capital markets expectations, CME. All right, so this is study session 4 here. Capital markets expectations, kind of broken up into a very basic review of economics, sort of macroeconomics, what drives markets and the economic cycle, and then a discussion about forecasting and basic models for forecasting expected returns and risk premiums and so on. So, if you're advising a client, first thing, you're going to need to be ethical, all right? Need to know how to present performance, all right? If you're marketing and so on, and presenting performance to clients. You're also going to need to know about behavioural traits. You're going to need to forecast market returns, asset class returns. You're going to need to know about the models which you can use to generate the best weights to meet certain goals. That's called strategic asset allocation. All right, so there's a big section on asset allocation. You'll notice around that you've got the asset classes circling. You've got derivatives, and currency management is thrown in there at level 3 as well. Fixed income, equity and alternatives. They're all part of this ecosystem. The role that they play in a portfolio what types of clients would benefit from them, what types of clients wouldn't, okay? Then we move into, a key part of level 3 is the IPS, all right? So this is the investment policy statement of the client. This is a formal written statement of the client's objectives and the constraints that they are subject to, both for an individual client, a high net worth individual, or for an institution like a pension fund or a foundation or a sovereign wealth fund, okay? That's a core part of level 3, and you'd expect to see that featuring heavily in the morning. About half, or just less than half, historically, of the level 3 morning paper revolves around this IPS process for both an individual and for maybe one or two different types of institution. Now, at the back end of this kind of portfolio and wealth planning life cycle, if you like, is executing the decisions that have been made along the way, evaluating the performance, due diligencing managers that maybe you're allocating to externally. These are all parts of the portfolio management process. And that's what level 3 is about, applying this portfolio management process to the case that is in front of you. You know, I'm standing here, I'm thinking, I'm listening to what I'm saying, I'm kind of thinking that sounds a bit too broad brush. You know, what you've got to realise is that the exam is very targeted. So, for example, the exam historically might have 20 minutes on economic analysis. And when you get in there, you know, it's a standalone 20 minutes and it's broken down into sort of, 3 or 4 chunks, 5 or 6 minutes each, okay, 6 to 6 minutes each, so it's quite granular. And then when you look at what's required, it's very, very explicit. So if you've got your curriculum knowledge and you're answering the question and you're referencing the case in front of you, chances are there's not a big discussion to be had about what the right answer is. Like I say, you hear lots of horror stories about level 3. And a large reason for those horror stories being spread is it's not because they're false, but actually they're probably out of date. The CFA Institute themselves say about 10 years ago they changed the way they apply level 3. All right, I've already mentioned this. Level 3 used to be very open, used to be very, if you like, discussional. Might even have questions that are like 30 minutes long where you have to kind of justify what your view is on something. That does not happen anymore. That doesn't happen anymore. There's been a strategic move by the CFA Institute since around about 2009, 2010. It's been gradually happening, but there was a big shift 2009, 2010 when the exam became very granular and there was a right answer. And like, the problem, the bad technique that students have at level 3 is that they resist that. They don't pick the low-hanging fruit. They don't focus on what is the best thing to do. They kind of sit there and they look at a case and they go, but what if? And I find myself in level 3 classes consistently going, no, not what if. Don't start extrapolating this thing and shoehorning what you want to try and blow this up. What is the most likely answer to this question if you answer it directly and you apply curriculum knowledge? All right? What is the most appropriate thing to do? Don't look for counterexamples. Don't go around the edges. What's the most likely thing that we should do here? And 90% of the time in the exam, the answer is very, very obvious if you know your curriculum and you stay very faithful to the question. You don't deviate. You don't be a deviant, right? So that's the general idea. It's not as broad brush as you might think. We do need to make sure that we can integrate all of this material and apply it to cases that pop up in front of us, but it is not a vast open sea where you have to try and navigate across it without a map. It's very, very well it's very, very well oriented, the exam, okay? And you'll get confidence with that as you do more past papers. Now, we've already mentioned, and question practice, we've already mentioned pass rates. I did mention at the start that pass rates for level 3 are in the kind of mid-50s. The point I'll just reinforce at this stage is that is surprisingly low given that level 3 is not as technically demanding as level 2. All right, so the kind of conditional probability of passing level 3, if level 2 is harder, if you want, should be like really high. It used to be. You go back to the 60s, pass rates were very high, but it's a feature of these professional qualifications that pass rates tend to drop over time. And yes, the pass rate has been dropping. It's in the mid-50s right now, and that seems to be a level where it's stabilised. You can see that there's vast growth in the CFA, just as an interesting point of information. They really are expanding globally as a designation. It really has. The CFA designation really has done, and the CFA Institute's really done a very good job at making it the global kind of gold standard in investment management. But that aside, this is surprisingly low, given that level 2 is technically more difficult than level 3. So why is that? I've already mentioned one thing. I think people might be complacent. They might think, well, level 2, I deserve to pass level 3. They go in, and whilst it might be easier, it's still not easy. All right? So level 3 might be easier than level 2, but it's still not easy. So if you dine out, or try and dine out on your level 2 status, you'll find you're going to struggle. The other thing, as I've already mentioned, is poor morning paper technique. When people struggle with level 3, they struggle in the morning paper. And when I mark mock exams, for students, I can see it from the first page. From the first page, I could probably say they're going to do well or they're not going to do so well. All right. The classic mistake at level 3 when you're writing stuff is writing too much, writing stuff that isn't relevant. When you're nervous, you kind of gabble, you waffle. That's what happens when people are nervous. They kind of talk a lot. All right. And particularly in an exam, they don't want to say nothing because definitely get no marks. So let's say a lot. Don't do that. Stay targeted, stay focused. The examiner's going to respect you a lot more if you're very succinct, very to the point. You justify why what you're saying is the answer. Right? It's a very important point that you justify what you're saying in that morning paper. But if you answer the question, you reference the case in front of you, and you justify what you're saying, that, to me, is the three-pronged technique to getting through your level 3 paper. And I think a lot of students don't actually get that up to speed. I think some students are getting found out at level 3 with regards to their ability to write an exam a standard answer. But then again, you could kind of throw that into just not doing enough question practice and not working enough on technique. I think the other thing is at level 3 there might be a bit of exam fatigue. We're getting on a little bit. It's the third time we've gone through this. A little bit of complacency, a little bit of more responsibility at work. Maybe some people have got more responsibility at home, kids coming along. It might be the reason why pass rates aren't as high as we might expect. But the good news is, if you dedicate yourself to level 3, your studies at level 3, you'll get the same result as you got for the previous 2 levels. So just take heart from that. CFA is a very fair exam. Might be hard, all right, which is a good thing once you've got it, right? But it is very fair. And this is another thing at level 3, that at all levels really, that people worry about, that they shouldn't really. And that is that they worry about the examiner trying to catch you out, trying to tap your ankles, trying to distract you. There are exams out there that will do that. And maybe some of us have had experience with those. But the CFA program doesn't do that. The CFA program allows those delegates, those students that have genuinely put the time and the effort in, right? No shortcuts apart from productivity enhancements that we're giving you here, right? They've genuinely put the time in, they've done the question practice, and when they get into the exam room, it's just another day. Which is what happened at level 1, level 2, right? You got in there, just another day, you came out. Someone said to you, how'd you get on? You don't say, oh, I passed that was easy. What you say is, we'll see. Right? And deep down, you know that actually there was enough in the exam that you're pretty confident, you're in the right zone, all right, that you hit the fairway with enough questions that actually that was a pretty good round, if you want that sort of analogy. And the other thing, you could apply what's called the Peter Principle. The Peter Principle is quite an entertaining principle. This was the idea of an educator, Lawrence Peter, who was a Canadian author and educator, and he kind of was looking at management structures in firms, and he came up with this idea, the Peter Principle, that what you'll find in big firms is that people will always get promoted as long as they're doing a good job. All right, so Stuart does a good job, and he gets promoted. Stuart does a good job at his next role, he gets promoted. And what that leads to generally is people getting promoted to the level where they're not very good. Right? This is the Peter principle. Level 1 was fine, you got promoted. Level 2, well done. All right, you got through it. Okay, you got promoted. All right. Level 3, the ability to apply your knowledge to the case in front of you and answer the question using words that you have to come up with. Have you been promoted to your level, your first level of incompetence? My response to you is no. If you follow, if you follow the guidance and the structure of the courses at Schweser, there's no reason why you can't have the same success at level 3 as you do at did at level 1 and 2. But you do need to get your technique right. And that's what we're going to be, focusing on. That's what we have been focusing on in this video, and what we'll be focusing on continuously as we go through our courses. All right, your morning paper technique. All right, so let's move on. What do people say about CFA level 3? I've covered a lot of ground on this sort of level. When we ask charter holders, what do you think of CFA level 3? Well, charter holders, of course, have passed it. They actually say, well, it was the easiest one, it was the least technical one, it was kind of big picture, and if you kind of knew your stuff, then it was okay. Candidates, though, very different when they're going through it. All right, this might be a kind of a behavioural thing. When you're going through it, candidates say, "Oh, I don't always know what to write. The questions are vague. I don't really know where it's coming from. It could be yes, it could be no." All right, and some delegates that do badly, they do come out and they do say, "I don't know that. I don't know why I did so badly." And this is a new thing at level 3, right? What I find at level 1 and level 2 is that delegates come out the exam and they are quite despondent. They're quite low, their morale is quite low. Then they look at their result and they're pleasantly surprised. Oh, wow, I did a lot better than I expected. At level 3, for the first time, it happens the other way round. People are kind of like, yeah, that was okay. And then they're shocked at how badly they did. Now, why is that? Well, if you ask the candidates, they might say, I've got no idea why I failed. But in my experience, candidates are usually either honest or self-aware enough to say, and you can see it in the way they present the results now, it was the morning paper. I flunked it. All right, so, once again, I keep writing that word, either spelt correctly or otherwise. It's all about that morning paper technique that you need to work on. But don't forget the afternoon. We've had years at level 3, in fact many years, the feedback I tend to get is that one paper was okay, it's kind of like good cop, bad cop. One paper was okay and another paper wasn't okay, and that's something that I hear from delegates very frequently. So be careful, it could be a good morning, great morning paper, and then the afternoon, the item set stuff is really quite tough. So that kind of dovetails back with what I said earlier on about not taking the afternoon for granted. Don't take your eye off the fact the afternoon's going to be tricky, all right? But yes, generally speaking, the content is not as technically demanding as level 2, so it's a bit more broad brush. And once you get it and you look back on your level 3 experience, you realise that actually you're applying your knowledge like a wealth manager, like a portfolio manager, and it was actually the most applied and most pragmatic level. And in hindsight, maybe it was quite pleasant, but maybe not when you're going through it. Here's an endorsement from one of our students that we're very happy to see is saying that Kaplan Schweser do a good job in helping to alleviate the issues that maybe they were having at level 3. All right. What does the Institute say? The Institute says, well, the constructed response questions in the morning, they have varying structures and point values, typically have several parts related to a case study that describes an investment challenge applied. A case study that's in front of you, and you need to apply the curriculum knowledge to it. Candidates' responses require a higher degree of specificity. So, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of being very specific in your answer. Don't be afraid of being quite curt and succinct and to the point. Don't be rude, all right? Don't leave anything out, but don't be afraid with your constructive response to getting to the point quickly. A buzzword, a key definition, a key idea, an equation, something like that needs to be used. Don't be afraid of getting into it quickly and just getting to the answer very quickly. That's what the examiner's looking for, all right? What the examiner doesn't want is meandering, waffling, people trying to pick up marks by, through some sort of alternative path. They're just not interested in that. These days, there is an answer. It is either, often in the exam you're circling, higher, unchanged or lower in response to something that's happened in a case. There is an answer. One of those three are correct, and you need to justify why you picked it. And that's your challenge. There's a nice report. You can find it actually. You can Google it. That's quite a nice report. CFA program, our 5th decade. That's out there. You can find that on the information superhighway. If you want some sort of recreation, you can have a look at that. But we're picking out some of the things that they say from that study that they put out. I think it was sort of 2013, something like that. So yes, there's less reading. There's actually fewer readings. There's only 38 readings at level 3. There was 57 at level 1. That's a huge difference. There was 48 at level 2, 38 at level 3. It's a huge difference, isn't it? And they're easier. They're not so technical. But the difficulty at level 3 is not the content. This is what people really struggle with. It's not the content. They read the books. That's okay. And then they see a case. This is what happens in the exam. Here comes the exam. They look at it and they're like, they can't see the connection between what they've looked at here and what's going on right there. They can't connect it. And the connection is here, right? Applying the curriculum, what you know, to the case in front of you and staying faithful to case facts, all right? And saying the most sensible thing, picking the lowest hanging fruit. People might think, well, there's less reading, it's easier. They might apply the same techniques they did at level 2, which is level 2, there's lots of technical areas when you think about things like derivatives, at level 2, portfolio management at level 2, FRA, you'll notice there's no FRA at level 3, you'll notice there's no quant at level 3, all right? When people look at level 3, it's like, that's okay, but they're failing to see that they are right in the crosshairs of mapping that curriculum. That's the task at level 3 onto the case that's in front of them. That's the challenge. And also, people often accuse level 3 of being, the level 3 curriculum being muddled, maybe contradictory. I think level 3 is where the curriculum, it grows up a bit. Do you know what? The world isn't binary or trinomial. The answer is not A, B or C. The world is a vast, noisy, continuous, dirty spectrum of information that we have to kind of look at and assess what the sufficient thing to do is. And in that, we make assumptions. So level 3 will focus a lot more, as you'll see, about issues with processes, features of processes, advantages and disadvantages of different models. Level 3 might discuss the pros and the cons of a particular technique. Now, it looks, when you read that and you just want to learn black and white or A, B and C, it's right or it's wrong. When you look at that and you're too rigid with your view of the world, you're going to snap, right? And that's why I think people say readings are contradictory, because it's a little bit more discussion about the pros and the cons. There might even, be some areas where it doesn't come to us massively, the curriculum doesn't come to a massively comprehensive conclusion. And that's okay. It just means, there is mixed evidence for something. So that, people struggle with that as well. So, the world isn't black and white. The world isn't A, B and C. And there's a little bit more of that level 3. And particularly when you're in the middle, the curriculum and the case in front of you, if you can't connect those two dots, then suddenly level 3 becomes hard. All right? The key thing is you need to get inside the shoes of the advisor, the portfolio manager, that is applying this knowledge over here in the curriculum to the case in front of them. You need to answer the question. Now, you might think that's trivial, but one of the biggest issues at level 3 is not answering the question, kind of saying something that you know is correct, hoping that the examiner says, well, they didn't really address the point in hand, but what they said is true, so I'll give them a mark. No marks there. All right? Answer the question, reference the case. It's very often reference the case in front of you. It's very often the case that the answer is lifting out, not always, but the answer is lifting out a line and then justifying why, for example, so justifying why what you've lifted out of the case answers the question. That's kind of like, for me, that's what makes a good level 3 answer. You're answering the question, you're not deviating from what's being asked, you're referencing a specific part of the case that's in front of you. You're literally lifting it out of the, of the case, and you're using it in your answer, and the key thing is this is the bit that people forget. You are justifying why what you're referencing answers the question. And it's that justification that uses the curriculum, knowledge from the curriculum. All right? And there it is, that's the puzzle. All right? If you kind of focus on that, and this will come as you do lots of level 3 question practice. If you focus on that, that's how you mature as a level 3 delegate. So look, they go for constructed response at level 3 because generally it is tougher to get a good score in a constructed response question. This is the morning paper, of course. Most delegates tend to get multiple choice questions correct. It's harder to score well in a constructed response question. For an average constructive response question, you'd expect like 50% of delegates to receive a failing score, whereas you might expect a majority of delegates to get the right result in a well-formed multiple choice question. It's just a completely different technique, and it relies a lot on you being in the middle of the curriculum and the exam question that's in front of you. So we've spent a lot of time talking about the exam structure. The slides here are really just catching up with us a bit. We know already that the morning exam is constructed response. What's that word essay doing there? Let's get rid of that. That's no good. All right, no essays. All right, creative writing. I'm not really sure what creative writing is. Making stuff up, writing a novel, imagining things. None of that. The constructive response is answering the case in front of you, referencing the case, a specific point of the case, and justifying why what you're referencing answers the question in hand. Okay, that's what a constructive response question is. There's going to be 9 to 12. Like last few years it's been 10, but it can vary between 9 to 12 questions with multiple parts. So don't forget the morning exam is 3 hours. That remains true. All right. So you're looking here. If you've got 10 questions, we're looking at sort of 18 minutes, aren't we? 10 questions on average, it's sort of 18 minutes. And those 18 minutes are split out into multiple parts. So, we're looking at 4 minutes here, 6 minutes there. It's very, very focused as to what you have to do. Like I say, when I mark mock exams, I look at a paper, a delegate's first page, second page, I get a very good idea as to whether they're going to do well or not. Because when delegates run out of time, they'll often say, I ran out of time at the end, but they don't. They use up too much time at the start of the exam. They write way too much at the start, and they're very nervous, and they really want to make sure they get those first marks, and sometimes they waffle and want to demonstrate how clever they are and so on, how much they know, and then guess what? They run out of time. You go to question 8, 9, 10, they're not there. It's flatlining, right? So it is time pressured. The afternoon exam, it's going to be similar to your level 2 vignettes, as we've already said, your item sets, a mix of 4 and 6 multiple choice questions, similar to level 2. Like I've already said a couple of times, the key risk is you take that for granted when actually, do you remember level 2? It's quite hard, wasn't it? Yeah, so you've got to make sure your item set fitness is up to speed as well. Now your morning exams are 100% portfolio management. That's what the CFA Institute calls it, but we can give you guidance as to what tends to come up. Generally speaking, about half of the morning paper is focused around the investment policy statement, all right? So the IPS. And that's applying to an individual, things like tax considerations, concentrated positions, risk management for individuals, and then onto institutions like pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, endowments, foundations, these different kinds of institutions that need portfolio management advice and services. So like 10 questions in the recent exams, 3 to 5 parts, 3 to 9 minutes. We know this stuff, all right? You will write your answer in a page that's designated for the answer, all right? Make sure that you're neat and you're clear. You don't get marked down on spelling or grammar. but make sure what you'll get marked down for is not conveying what the examiner wants to hear. And it's very, very clear what the examiner wants to hear they're very clear with their guideline answers. And when you think about the curriculum and what's in front of you, it's up to you to realise how clear it is which part is being applied where. All right? And then suddenly the marks are coming. They used to have lined paper, but that's gone. So that's an old style now. They tend to have these kind of blocks where you answer question 1 at part A, that sort of thing. There's quite a lot of circling things. So there's quite a lot of, like I said earlier, higher, unchanged or lower, and you have to circle one and justify why you circled it. So in that sense, there's still a bit of multiple choice kind of style going on. You will find, no matter how much I emphasize it in this video, you will find that when you get to looking at these constructive response questions, they're a lot more targeted and less open than you might worry about. Okay. When we have a look as a tutor team at the kind of the surprising or arguable questions, they're not really there anymore. Old days, there used to be this. You hear these kind of rumours. They're really out of date. Oh yeah, the questions are vast. They're open-ended. There's grey areas. You could justify yes, higher, or no, lower. As long as you justify. It doesn't tend to happen anymore. It just doesn't tend to happen anymore. And I'd be surprised if they changed that. The CFA Institute. All right. I'd be very surprised if that was. That trend has been going on for years. I'd be very surprised if they suddenly reversed it. Okay. But there are some questions at level 3 which really cause people a lot of this, like 2%. What is that out of your 360 minutes that you've got? And by the way, that's another way to think about your exam. You've got to look at the minutes that are available. It is generally a point a minute. All right. So if there's sort of 6 minutes in a question, and there's 2 things to do. You've got to break it up and think, well, there's 3 minutes on each. Maybe there's a point for picking the right yes, no, up, down, and 2 points for justifying it correctly. It's that sort of idea. You'll see it all in the marking guides of the materials that we provide. You'll find in the exam there is going to be like 1.7%, that's like 2%. So what are we talking about here? Like 7 minutes, something like that. You're going to find that there's like 7 minutes where you're really being challenged. Really being challenged. Something's being presented in a way you've never seen it before. That is exclusively there to really try and knock the people off of their horses, try and take out the people that just psychologically speaking aren't in the right mindset to be a CFA charter holder. Let's just put it that way. The striving for 100%, the striving for everything to be being true, false, the striving to know everything. Maybe at level 3, there's a little bit less of that, and there's a little bit more like, so what would you do in this situation? And they will present something to you in the level 3 exam that you haven't necessarily seen before. And one of my favourite level 3 questions ever, I can't remember what year it was now, but going back a few years now, what they did was they said, hey, I think it was 7 minutes available. They said with 5 minutes, they said, hey, go and apply this model to this situation. All right, so they tell you what model to use. So you go, the model's this, you apply it to that situation. And you came out with an answer, right? And obviously there's 4 marks available, something like that, 4 or 5 marks available if you do that. And then there was 2 bolted onto that. Briefly explain why, I think it was something to do with central banks, briefly explain why the central bank might not target that policy interest rate. Now, if you search the curriculum, right, if you search the CFA curriculum with a fine-tooth comb, you won't find any discussion about why a central bank might not choose to follow the output of this particular model. Right? Now, the people that can't just think for themselves and apply it to the question didn't know what to say. The people that looked at the model and sort of thought, well, the model looks at GDP, looks at inflation. I guess if the central bank doesn't feel that GDP inflation are the key drivers of monetary policy, then it wouldn't follow that model. And that was the answer. Right? Now, you've got the people that are like, well, I don't know, no one's told me what to say, so I can't say anything. They're going to struggle with that. But there's another end to that spectrum as well. There are people writing, well, okay, if you've got a liquidity trap, if there's some sort of, problem with systemic risk in the banking sector, and you're kind of there, the examiner's there like this, kind of going, wow, okay, I guess you kind of got the point, but the answer is a lot more straightforward than that. The answer is a lot more straightforward than that. And that's something else I want to emphasize as we go through this video. The answer, you'll see this when you look at guideline answers for the morning paper for level 3, it's often a lot more straightforward than what you were worried it could have been. Okay? So, but sometimes I feel like I say this a lot to level 3 delegates coming into the program, and other times I just kind of think, rather like I kind of think, well, maybe you should just go and experience it yourself, and you'll see. All right, but hopefully, I can tell you that, but hopefully you'll experience that, and it will really sink in. All right. So there you go. I mean, it's a broad curriculum, and one of the other things when we see weights later on, another thing that's different is a lot of these topics here, they don't get their own distinct weight. So it's kind of thrown together a lot more. It's integrated together a lot more, notwithstanding my comment that each individual case is quite specific. So what do I mean by that? Well, look, when we look at topic weights later on, you'll see that the asset classes like derivatives, fixed income, equity, alts, and economics as well, and ethics, the things that I've circled there, they get their own weight. So like you're used to, like ethics is 10 to 15, percent. All right, you'll notice that I didn't circle, say, behavioural finance. Right, behavioural finance doesn't have its own weight. Behavioural finance, asset allocation, the IPS stuff, and all this stuff here, it doesn't have its own weight. There's a big topic that captures all of these called portfolio management and wealth planning, and that's 35 to 40% of your exam. It's what I call the soup. It all gets thrown into the soup. But the exam is still quite targeted when you see it. It's just another change at level 3 that you need to be aware of. Hey, let's have a look at a level 3 question, shall we? This was in the 2018 exam. It was the last question, question 10. Look at this. Very, very, very specific. It's part A of question 10. Support Kinloch's conclusions regarding corridor widths for equities, commodities, 6 minutes. So the idea here is you look at the marks that are available, 6 minutes, you divide it up for 3 for that one, 3 for that one. You've got to support someone's conclusions. So there's some conclusions in the case, and you need to support them from what you know in the curriculum about corridor widths. Now, you're in the middle. If you can just mentally, obviously not actually, but mentally, yeah, corridor widths, I've got the basics of this in play. You look at what's in front of you. Yeah, I think he's right. He does say something about corridor widths for equities. He says something, or she says something about corridor widths for commodities. And you can back it up with a brief justification. All of those 6 marks that are available there, they're yours. Okay? We'll come back to this later, and I'll show you the actual case, and I'll show you what an example of an answer that will get full credit. So look, I'm standing here, and I've done for a few times. I've kind of stood between the curriculum and the case in front of you. The graders know exactly what they're looking for, folks. Right? This is another kind of idea that I need to reinforce about it not being as open and as loose as you might worry about. They've got a very clear idea of what they're looking for. And grading keys, you can express things in many different ways, but they're really looking for specific points. All right? They will formally audit the marking that's gone on. All right? Once again, this is from that rather interesting report. You might want to have a look at that in your own time, but we're just picking out some highlights there. So, yeah, this reinforces my point from earlier that it is very targeted. And, my personal view about a good level 3 answer is you answer the question that's in front of you, you reference the case that's relevant to answer the question, and you justify it coming from the curriculum over there. And these slides kind of back up that tricolor, if you like, that sort of 3 pillared foundation to your success. The curriculum is here, taught material. The case is in front of you, and you're answering the question. And where do you sit? You sit right there. That's where a pass at level 3 comes, right in the middle there. Okay? Not people trying to sort of, they're looking at the case and they're like, oh, they've mentioned, my mortgage-backed securities, I'll write about those. Nope, didn't answer the question. Not people that try and shoehorn somehow something that's true onto the case. Nope, No good. Not people that hedge. CFA Institute actually do say that people try and hedge. They'll kind of answer and go, oh, I think the answer is yes, but I'll just justify no, so you give me some marks. Don't do that. That's wrong. Well, by the way, another thing that people ask about a lot at level 3 is they say, if they ask for 2 things, which they often do, give 2 factors, give 3 factors which support or contradict or something like that. If they say, give us 2 factors which support this idea, people often ask, hey, what about if I give 3? Well, there's no point in doing that because the examiner will take your first 2 and will ignore the 3rd one. So then people say, oh, well, I'll give my best 2 first then. No, there's no point in giving 3 because they'll only look at your first 2 and not the 3rd one. So if I write more than, no, you don't write more than 2 because they'll only look at the first 2 and writing anything else is a waste of time. And then people sort of say, but what if I phrase something like there could be 2 in 1 and there isn't, and then I phrase, and my response to that is you're trying to game the system. Don't try and game the system. The system is set up to give you the marks if you address the answer, you reference the case, and you justify why what you're saying answers the question. Don't try and game it, all right? So there you go. That's my advice there. A few more slides here on a good constructed response answer. If you're writing, organise the response very clearly. Often it's in a kind of a table format, so you have to do it like yes, no, higher, unchanged, lower, that sort of thing. And then you justify why you're saying what you're saying. That's the point that people often miss out. They don't justify what they've said. It's very interesting. About 4 or 5 years ago, the CFA Institute started writing in the exam, simply stating case facts without justification will receive no credit. They started writing that in the exam. Now, why would they start writing that? Clearly, they're writing that in the exam because they're getting fed up with people just saying, higher, next question. In response to a question, the liquidity needs of this investor, are they higher, unchanged, or lower due to this change in their circumstances? Something like that. Oh, it's higher, next question. And clearly, the examiner's getting pretty fed up with that and saying, if you just say higher, and that's true, but you don't justify it, I'm not going to give you any marks because you're just guessing. Right? So I need to see genuine evidence that you're applying your curriculum knowledge to this question. Otherwise, no marks. Okay? So from a qualitative perspective, make sure you structure your answers very succinctly, getting to the point, okay? And you justify why you're saying what you're saying. The numerical questions, you can kind of label inputs to a calculation. You can use formulae, all right? You will be using formulae on the exam, okay? And my advice would always be to write the formulae out at the start. You can use letters for certain, characters, A for assets, E for equity, D for debt, and all that stuff that's very, very reasonable that the examiner will know what you mean. But it's very important you write the formula out at the start and then you use it and you make a mistake, the examiner can still give you 3 marks out of 4 because they can look at what you've done and they say, you know what, you actually had it, but it looks like you read a 7 as a 2 or something, and so you just got the wrong answer. So I'll just knock a mark off because you didn't actually answer the question, but I'll give you 3 out of 4. And that's 75%, and that is a pass, right, of course. Don't forget, level 3, you're still aiming for 70%, all right, as a passing score. You're aiming for 70% as a passing score. The actual pass mark might be lower than that, all right, but 70% is you definitely being over the line. Can I just emphasise just what an important thing I just pointed towards is you can get partial credit at level 3 and not get the answer right. You might not think this is a big deal, but this is a big deal, right? And it ties into that kind of binary thing that I was talking about earlier about level 1, level 2, the sort of the trinomial ABC thing. The bottom line is this. You can pass level 3 without getting a full question out. You can get partial credit for the first time. If there's an 8-minute question, you can get 7 out of 8, and that is a pass. Well done. Congratulations. Have your CFA level 3 and have your charter, potentially, without actually getting all the marks out. Hooray! This is a reason to celebrate, okay? If you've got good exam technique and you're holding the hand of the examiner and showing them what you're doing and you're not wasting too much time and you're being very succinct and to the point, you can get, there might be a real nasty 12 marker, you can get 10 out of 12, and that's a very, very healthy score. I mean, ideally you'd get 12 out of 12, But no one's ever going to go, well, you didn't get the whole thing out, so 0, as long as you show you're working. All right, show your thought process and show you're working in a calculation. All right, so hooray for partial credit. That really is a reason to celebrate. All right, and yeah, the slides are kind of backing up what I've said about the world not being perfect, and the constructed response question makes people feel vulnerable because of that, because it's kind of bringing that into play. It's bringing that into play. All right, you should be happy in the constructive response question when you're getting sort of 60s, that sort of thing. You should be feeling that you're doing a very good job as your score ticks up above the 65% level. Okay. Time management is an issue. We've already addressed that. All right. Minutes are points in the exam. We've already addressed that as well. With item sets, you can guess A, B, or C. Guess, you just go tick, guess. Okay. Constructive response, it's harder to guess, isn't it? I suppose you could circle one, but it's harder to come up. It's actually, you can't guess the answer, really. If you don't know what you're talking about, you can't guess, oh, it's probably to do with, Stuart's age as an investor. I mean, you could maybe guess a few things along the way, but it's a lot harder to guess. So do skip if necessary. Don't write more than you need to. Don't waffle. The graders have got a lot to get through, and the last thing they want to see, waffle, by the way, that might be a bit of a UK term. Waffle is kind of saying too much, all right? Don't waffle, don't say too much. The examiner will respect you. If you don't know the answer to something, you just don't say anything, and then they turn to the next question and you've aced it, the examiner's going to think, I kind of like this delegate. Now look, I'm not saying that it's a strategy to use, but I'm just saying, from a human perspective, the grader's going to find that a lot easier to mark and give you credit for. The grader's going to find it very difficult if you've splashed everything. Sometimes you're getting the point in there somewhere, and other times, you're just waffling, as I call it. All right, you're just saying too much. All right, keep an eye on the time. So what are you going to do, folks? How are you going to efficiently prepare for the Level 3 exam? What are you going to do? How do you maximise the chances of your success? The good news is, subject to all of the kind of new ideas that we've introduced in this video so far, the good news is repeat the application and the intense focus on question practice that you had at levels 1 and 2, and you're going to get the result that you want in all likelihood. Okay? So yes, well-structured study effort. You do not cram. You do not wait to the last minute. All right? Slowly but surely you will catch this Level 3. What's the saying? Slowly, surely, catchy monkey. Right? You will catch this this, right? Because you did it at Level 1 and Level 2. Don't be afraid. Don't be concerned that as you go through the program, ideal time to start would be around about sort of December, January, all right, late December, probably mid-December. Ideally, open the books, start doing some refreshing your ethics, that sort of thing. That's a nice segue in to Level 3, and then really committing to serious study in January. So you're getting a good 5.5, 6 months towards your exam. All right, 300 hours. That's that famous figure that's touted out there. Me personally, or when you look at the CFA Institute surveys, they ask people how much work they've done. The average at Level 3 was 328, something like that. I mean, that's what people say. All right. Me personally, I'm always wary of round numbers that apply to everybody. Okay. When I went through the CFA program, I made sure I hoovered up all of the support I could get from training prep providers. And I made sure I think it was 150 hours of my own study outside of that. I think if you top those up, that we're getting close to the 300. So everybody's different. But for me, the most key thing, the most important thing, is that you must have done this before, target not June, when your exam date is, but target a month, ideally 6 weeks before that, to get through the curriculum. 6 weeks before your exam, get through the curriculum. Stop watching videos, stop reading your Schweser notes, and move on to starting to try and memorize stuff. All right, don't worry about not memorizing stuff in January, February, March, April, May, and so on. But when you get to May, you get through the curriculum in good time, and then you can spend time memorizing stuff and enhancing your question practice technique, doing lots of questions. So don't start late, all right? Start sort of December, January time. Make sure you put the hours in. For me, put enough hours in. 300, like I say, I'm always suspicious of round numbers like that. But what I would say is put enough time in such that you get through the curriculum, videos and Schweser notes. Start of May would be ideal. Earlier would be even better. Okay, and that's a significant investment. And then you've got a serious amount of questions to get through after that. Focus on the LOSs, the learning outcome statements. Think about what you could be asked. Schweser's done that for you. It's a big central kind of tenet of the way that we prepare our materials, is that we're really focusing on how you get asked stuff. So we're not really focusing on kicking things into the weeds and chasing them to their most intricate extrapolation. All right, we're not doing that. We're really focusing on what you could be asked in the exam. And the good thing about level 3 is there's a lot of form, a lot of visibility, a lot of history that's publicly available. We can say, yep, the examiner tends to, test this in a certain way in the morning paper, tends not to focus on certain areas. But, that's the visibility that we get from the morning paper being published. It's also visible from the fact that we can see the learning outcome statements. It's important that you focus on that in terms of how things could be tested in the exam, but Kaplan Schweser will do that for you. Now, I don't know how you study. Everybody studies differently, but there are a lot of pedagogical studies out there which look at the efficacy, the efficiency of different techniques. People that underline study notes or just go through highlighting them, I always think when I see study notes like that, I always think that the things that stand out are the things that haven't been highlighted, which is the opposite of what you're trying to achieve. And that does bear out in academic studies. That's pretty low utility with regards to retaining and understanding information. Plus using, mnemonics, acronyms, rhymes, poems to remember things. For me personally, classic mistake, in my view, is rote learning formulae. Just kind of like F little t, big T, and not really knowing what it means. That's a real disaster. If you find yourself doing that, you need to think again. All right, formulae are simply a way of succinctly summarizing a relationship that needs to be understood. All right, so rote learnings of lists, poems. I mean, lists, me personally, I don't mind there being an odd list of what's there, as long as you understand what's there, because it helps abridge and make a curriculum nice and concise. But yeah, academic studies, you can't just rely on that. Does it help to have a specific study space that's organised and quiet? You might think it does, but rather surprisingly, academic studies tend to show that doesn't help, and studying in different conditions gives the brain, a good, well-rounded workout and helps you on exam day. So don't be worried about studying, at coffee shops. Don't be worried about studying, on the train or the tube. All right, but obviously, don't study at the ball game or at the movies or whatever. But don't be afraid of mixing up a little bit. All right. By the way, if we're talking about effective study methods, I'm a big fan of this one. All right. It would drive my flatmates crazy when I went through the CFA program a few years ago, because I'd actually try and explain things to myself out loud. It would drive my flatmates crazy, and it would also make me look like I wasn't particularly well balanced in that I was wandering around my flat talking to myself. It's a real leveler. When you try and say something, right, if you understand it, you just say what it is. If you don't understand it, there's a lot of sort of. And sometimes, take it from me, right, sometimes you don't even realise that you don't really get it until you try and explain it yourself. So I'm a big fan of this one. I really like that one, but that's just my personal view. Other techniques that have been shown to work is elaborate interrogation, really thinking, this is engaging those cogs again inside. They're supposed to be cogs inside your head. Thinking, why does this work? Does it always work? Are there situations where it doesn't work? Why does it work in this one situation and not another? It's really being inquisitive, and by doing that, you're really kicking the tires of the issue at hand, and you're not just staring at a bunch of words. And let's be honest, folks. You need to think about whether you understand stuff as well. The temptation is to get through stuff and think, well, I'll chance it. But you need to be honest, and then there's lots of resources, as we'll discuss, where you can drill down and dive deeper to try and aid your understanding. All right? What this does, if you engage in elaborate interrogation, self-explanation, what it does is it allows you to extend where you are to where you want to get. And there isn't like a step jump or a chasm where you're just relying on, a formula, remembering a formula or remembering a list of things, but you don't really understand why it's there. Okay? Now, highly effective methods. Interleaved learning. Yeah, talking of mixing it up, this is highly effective. We should focus on these ones. Highly effective methods. Spread your learning over time, structured study. Okay, don't worry about forgetting stuff that you see early on. When you come back, when you revise it, you'll see it again, and your brain will actually have stored it subconsciously, just in case you need it again. When you look at it again, your brain, when you go to sleep that night, actually goes, oh, I needed that. And then the next day, it kind of remembers it. Okay, so this is how we work. If we don't use something, if we don't reference something, it fades away. So that's why revision is important. Spread it over time, okay? Take quizzes quite quickly after looking at new material. Okay, take quizzes quite quickly, spread it over time, and don't be afraid of putting stuff down, letting it maybe drift into the subconscious, but then reviewing it. That's why you've got to get through all the material quickly, reviewing it, and it should come back and stick relatively quickly, all right? And mix it up, rather than just going ethics and spending, 2 or 3 weeks or whatever it is, 2 weeks on ethics. Why don't you interleave ethics through, make it like kind of a journey that you dip in. When your brain is frazzled with technical stuff, you can dip in, spend some time with ethics, have a look at some case studies. It's a change of pace, all right? You don't need to memorize anything, you just need to recognize things, and then you can go back to the formulae, the more technical stuff later, once you've kind of refreshed. So how is Schweser going to... Oh, just one more thing. So we've mentioned the test effect, all right? How is Schweser going to help you structure your studies? Well, Schweser has got the activity feed, all right? The activity feed is an automated study planner that helps you get through the curriculum in a good target time, breaks, your readings, as you'll know from CFA, from previous levels. You've got big study sessions, which are broken down into individual readings. What we do at Schweser is we break those readings down into modules. Those modules have little tests and little videos that you can watch, all right? And the key thing is that you stay on target, all right? You don't cram, you set out a study plan and you stick to it. And it doesn't always feel good. You get to study session 11, 12, you can't even remember what study sessions 4, 5 were. That's okay. You know from level 1 and level 2, that is part of the process. This is not a comfortable process. Anyone looking for comfort? Don't bother, all right? This process involves a lot of material again, a lot of discomfort along the way, and it comes together in the last few weeks. It starts to feel like it comes together, maybe even in the last few days as you approach the exam, okay? So stay on target, stay on schedule, and make sure, like with your previous levels, make sure that you do give it the respect it needs. This is a serious designation. It's one of the most difficult designations to actually take alongside, a job. So make sure you give it the attention that it requires. Leave plenty of time for review and exam question. Yeah, that's absolutely key. I would estimate sort of 4 to 6 weeks off the top of my personal head. So, I would target, the end of April, start of May to really finish your Schweser reading, video watching, that sort of thing, and so you've done your first pass on the curriculum. The other thing that I'd say, folks, is when the CFA Institute does its questionnaires, it's kind of, it asks delegates whether you use prep providers, whether they took time off, when they started studying, all these different questions, surveys, that's the word I was looking for. When the CFA Institute does its surveys to ask delegates how they prepare and what works, and they kind of conclude what works and what doesn't. Good news is using a prep provider works, all right? Seriously better pass or chance of passing if you use a prep provider. The other thing that works is getting some time off before the exam. Okay, I know we're not all in the luxurious position of being able to navigate that, but I'm just really passing that on to you as a really important piece of information if you're serious about getting through level 3 and having the CFA program behind you, done, period, right? You take 1 week off prior to the exam, chances of passing go up. And if you take 2 weeks off prior to the exam, chances of passing go up again. All right, so, make sure you bear that in mind, that time off before the exam is a key performance driver when it comes to your success. Okay? Anyway, these are the steps that Kaplan Schweser offer out in your preparation process. Okay, we've already said start early. Schweser notes, they should be familiar to you now if you've used Schweser at previous levels. These are going to be your books which succinctly summarize information in the curriculum and really looks at how it can be tested so you get up to speed with your exam technique and your exam relevant information as quickly as possible. All right, there are videos that you can watch along the way to help put some colour and put some intuition and context around some of the readings, okay? And then you can do end of module questions, end of reading problems in the CFA curriculum, very important, as you go along the way. So all of this is building up to the kind of the end of April, start of May sort of time. Use the Q bank as well to really drill down on areas that you're not comfortable with, areas where you want to see how is this tested, okay? And then move on to the next session, the Schweser notes, when you're feeling confident, okay? But keep going. Remember, you don't have to be 100% in any area. If you're 90% confident in 90% of the material in a certain area, keep going. And don't let any individual topic stop you from passing the exam, right? You know, there might be areas where you didn't like it, you're not familiar, and it really didn't do anything. You know, it really didn't go in, didn't sink in for you. If you freeze there and you get like, you know, a week behind your schedule, all right, but your confidence is being knocked, all these sorts of things, psychologically it's damaging and practically it's damaging as well. What you should do is focus on the basics, make sure you get the basics in play, or even note it as an area that needs further work, but you keep going, stay on target, make sure you get through your topics in good time. There are checkpoint exams to take along the way which should consolidate your learning, okay? And later on down the track there are review workshops and practice exams that you should be doing, okay, to really consolidate. This is in the kind of final month, 6 weeks or so, to really aid your understanding and to enhance your exam technique. There is a performance tracker on the Schweser portal which will help identify where you're in the red zone and where you need to do more work, and you can use that to drill down in the Q bank and practice exams to really help bolster your score. It's very important that you do look at actual past exams. Now what I will say, I mean they're out there, okay, they're publicly available, and there are resources on the Schweser portal which review relevant past AM morning exam questions. Not all past exam questions are still relevant to the current curriculum. There has been a relatively large turnover in the curriculum material. In the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen turnovers in areas such as asset allocation, fixed income and equity, and more recently we've seen it in the IPS related material. So you're going to have to take some guidance from us as to which past exam questions are still relevant, but all of that information will be on your portal. There are live exams available to you. Our suggestion is, as you approach the exam on the final day, you know, get some sleep, carb load up, like you're doing like you're doing an endurance race, something like that, and you review ethics, you know, late on. You should have been through your ethics reading and crib sheeting, if you like, along the way, video watching, but review ethics just before you go into the exam, because it's a nice way of tapering into the exam, and hopefully you'll go in and see something in the ethical part that you recognise that you only read recently, okay, because it's all about recognition with ethics. So here are the topic weights. You'll remember earlier that I said that the asset classes, so fixed income, equity, alts and derivatives, they get their own weights. See how important fixed income is at level 3? It's one of the biggest standalone weights, all right? Ethics is still a big deal, 10 to 15%, okay, and economics gets a standalone weight as well. But everything else, that's all this stuff here, I did mention this earlier, all this stuff here gets lumped in to what I call the soup, the portfolio management soup, okay? So portfolio management is really where you've got these cases and you're applying knowledge about behavioural finance, asset allocation, the IPS stuff, either from a private individual or an institutional perspective, and then the back end of the process, trading, evaluation, manager selection. And you're really applying that knowledge to the case in front of you. There are some very, notwithstanding curriculum changes that have happened of late, there are some very obvious patterns that are observable in recent AM papers that we can point you towards, and we will point you towards later on when you get into your question practice mode. So what do candidates say? Oh, by the way, this is just making the point that this kind of soup that's everything's lumped into, it looks vague, but you start to see there is quite a lot of structure to this paper. And what I mean by that is quite a lot of patterns that are there largely year in, year out when you look at historical papers, which will come later on. Okay. Now, successful candidates, what do they say? Look, they said they got through the curriculum in good enough time to do lots of questions. All right. What do unsuccessful candidates say? They said I needed to do more exam-like questions from a constructed response, particularly type point of view, because you're used to the item sets from level 2. All right. Both successful and unsuccessful delegates overweight in their mind the surprising questions, which we kind of say make up about 2% of the exam, looking at our opinion of it, but it's massively overweight. Remember that question that I told you about earlier? My favourite level 3 question from a kind of demonstrating the challenge. You had to think and say something that wasn't in the curriculum, but say something that was very common sense. It doesn't happen all the time, but that's what people remember. It was only 2 minutes out of 180 minutes, but that's what people remember. They forget about the 12 minutes, which is boilerplate. It was in the curriculum, you apply it to that case, marks. Next question, 25 minutes, largely boilerplate. It was in the curriculum, apply it to that case. Just be careful, for example, because that's a slightly different case. But if you notice that, full marks, right? It's that sort of idea. But there will be the odd surprise question, which is presented in a different way. And like I say, they're really just testing the A of CFA. Because a good analyst needs to pick something up that they've never seen before and kind of go, okay, if I apply a process to this, then it seems sensible that this is what I would say. Up, down, left, right, more or less unchanged. One of those things. That's one of those things, not all of those things. Okay, so here comes the sales bit of the video. We're going to talk about the products that Kaplan offer out. We have a very experienced tutor team here at Kaplan Schweser. I've already mentioned that I took my level 3 in 2003, and then I got into training in 2007, and I've been teaching level 3 ever since then. So, and I'm just thinking about where I sit in the big tutor scheme, the big tutor pool. I'm a relative youngster, I like to think. There's people out there that have got just as much, if not more, experience as me, which translates into multiple decades of experience in training towards CFA exams. And hopefully you've felt that level 1 and level 2 already. I'll just suggest that, strongly that is the case at level 3 as well. So we know about the pitfalls. Hopefully some of these things are coming through with you in this video. Schweser instruction. If you're in the States, there are live classrooms in the States. There are live classrooms in London. So depending on where you are in the world, check out your local faculty, and there might be live face-to-face classrooms. There's live online internet-based classrooms that accommodate for different time zones, okay? And there are on-demand videos as well. On-demand videos very much like this one, where you're not actually there, but you're watching it at your own pace. These on-demand videos are included in these packages. The most basic package that you could buy is the premium instruction package. Okay, so you'll get a weekly class, either live or live online, the Schweser notes, books 1 to 5, the practice exams, volumes 1 and 2, access to the QBank, checkpoint exams, the activity feed helping you structure your studies, the Schweser quick sheet, which is summarising key formulae, the ability to ask your instructor, so like an inbox where you can email someone like myself or another level 3 instructor, a resource library, lots of goodies there, lots of videos to watch that help delegates prepare for level 3. And there is a pass protection guarantee as well. If you come with us and you don't have the success that you were hoping for and you followed all of our advice in that event, then there are discounts on any support should you choose to have a second crack at the level 3 designation. One up from the premium package is the Premium Plus, which gives you access to Schweser's secret sauce, which is kind of an abridged version of the curriculum. Some people really like this, where at the end of your studies, you've got this abridged summary of the curriculum, and you can really think. You can use this relatively small book to assess where you're strong and where you need to do more work. And then there's late season reviews as well, which we mentioned earlier, which you might want to take, which will really focus in on exam technique and picking up marks on exam day. So there's 3-day versions. You can upgrade. That comes with the Premium Plus. You can upgrade to a 5-day version or even a 7-day wins a week, which is something that's often offered out by Kaplan Schweser, which is a real kind of residency-based boot camp where we just live, eat and drink everything CFA for those 7 days. All right, we've mentioned these late season reviews. There's just a little bit more information there. Okay, if you do need any more information on the Schweser products, then don't be afraid to check in on our website and have a look at the details, and don't be afraid to click through there and ask us any questions, if you've got any questions at all about any of the packages that are available. So look, let's wrap up by just answering that question that we raised earlier. Do you remember that corridor width question? Do you remember that? Okay, let's address this. Let's summarize some of the key hints I've given you about constructed response technique as well. Just like we did earlier, we read the question first. All right, didn't we? Just like you would with an item set from level 2, you read the requirement first, and you go back and look at the case and lift out what you need. Same for level 3 constructed response. Read the requirement. When they talk about the question here, they're talking about what you're required to do. Okay, so in our case, it was support a conclusion of somebody else. So read the question, then go back and look at the case, answer it by referencing the case and justifying what you're saying. So read the case facts. Think before you write, okay, and answer the question based on the curriculum, case facts, and the minutes that are available. Don't forget, read the question first and check out the minutes that are available, because that's going to guide how much you feel you need to say. Okay, sometimes you might notice that the command word is state, for example, and it's like 2 minutes. So just state it, move on. So other times you might see something that's 5 minutes, where you have to choose one and then justify, explain, by referencing why the other 2 options maybe weren't relevant. And that's okay, that's going to take a bit more time. Pick the right one, 1 mark. Portfolio A wasn't relevant because of this, 2 marks. Portfolio B wasn't relevant because of this, 2 marks. It's that sort of thing. You'll get used to this as you do more of these questions. So do you remember we said, hey, we're talking about corridor width. So that's coming from the curriculum. Corridor widths, you need to know what they are. All right, I'll give you a spoiler on that. All right, corridor widths are these ranges around your strategic long-term asset allocation that you have in a portfolio that you've set to meet long-term goals. They're ranges you're allowed to deviate from the strategic asset allocation as long as it's within this range. So tactically, if you're particularly bullish on a particular sector, maybe you could go overweight within the corridor. If you're particularly bearish, maybe you can go underweight within the corridor. The other thing is that these corridors set your rebalancing strategy. So when you move outside the corridors, you're going to have to rebalance, usually to the middle of the corridor. Okay, so they're a key feature, these corridors, in your rebalancing strategy for a portfolio. When you go outside them, all right, you're going to rebalance the portfolio. Okay, that's the general idea. So we're going to support Kinloch's conclusions regarding corridor widths for equities and commodities. 6 minutes. That must be 3 for this one, 3 for this one. Okay. So we've got to go back and read the case facts. Here they are. Robert Kinloch meets with one of his private wealth clients. Case, okay, over here. Patricia Marquez, who resides in the UK. Marquez's portfolio is currently rebalanced. Okay, so rebalance is in play and using the percentage of portfolio method. All right, so it is the percentage of portfolio method, without teaching this topic, in a holistic way. It is the percentage of portfolio method which uses these corridor widths, because we're using the percentage of the portfolio to set our rebalancing strategy. And there are other methods which we'll talk about when we get on the course. So target asset allocation and corridor widths are shown in Exhibit 1. So here they are. Here's Exhibit 1. We're still reading the case here. All right. Equities, target 60%, commodities 15%, fixed income 25%. All right, so there's your strategic asset allocation. Okay, you've got your corridor widths here, plus minus 5% for equity, plus or minus 3% for commodities, plus or minus 4% for fixed income. So the key thing is, now here comes your curriculum knowledge. Firstly, you know about the fact what these corridor widths are and the role that they play in rebalancing. So you know that. But the crucial thing is, what factors decide how wide your corridor widths should be? Sometimes your corridor widths can be very wide. Other times your corridor widths might have to be quite narrow. Okay? So this is going to come from the curriculum, coming from this side. Let's read on with this case and see if we see some factors which tie into the width of a corridor in this rebalancing process. So Kinloch and Marquez discuss a recent analyst report that forecasts the following changes in market conditions. Transaction costs for equities will decrease. The correlation between fixed income and equities will increase. The volatility of commodities will increase. Now, as a level 3 delegate, you're kind of looking at these bullet points. These are the things you're going to reference, right? These bullet points are factors which tie in, inherently into how wide these corridor widths can be. Okay? So you're kind of thinking, do you know what? These are the things I'm going to lift off the question, I'm going to use them in my response, and I'm going to justify why they're relevant. Okay? But it's also done in a way to agree or disagree with somebody else. So rather than getting you to do it on your own, in this particular case, which is quite common, you have to support, in other words, agree with what Kinloch concludes. And Kinloch concludes that equities, we cannot dictate what we should do with corridor width for equities. You'll notice that equities feature both here and here in these factors which tie into corridor width. But he does conclude that the corridor width for commodities should narrow. You'll notice there's only one discussion about commodities, factors that might affect the corridor width of commodities. Right, so are we there yet? We're not quite there yet. Here comes the question, at least we've seen this before. Now here we go. Answer the question. So we're going to support Kinloch's conclusion regarding corridor widths for equities. Kinloch's conclusion for corridor widths for equities is right here. It cannot be determined whether we should narrow or widen the corridor width for equities based on the information that I've highlighted there, because these are the factors that are driving corridor width. So we're really looking at the case, we're answering the question, now we need to use our curriculum knowledge. Now our curriculum knowledge is this. Your corridor widths are really driven by how stable or unstable the weights in your portfolio are likely to be. Okay, so I don't want to teach this from first principles because, we're just doing a how to pass level 3. But the general idea here is that if the weights, because don't forget what rebalancing is. Rebalancing is going back to neutral policy portfolio weights. All right? If the weights in your portfolio of your asset classes are unstable, then there's a high risk that they could suddenly shoot off and you could find yourself in a portfolio which is very different to the policy portfolio that you should hold over the long term to meet your long-term goals. And if that happens and there's a bad, market event, all right, there's an adverse movement in market prices, it could impair your ability to meet your goals. So if your weights of asset classes in your portfolio are unstable, that means you've got more risk to meeting your long-term objectives if you don't rebalance quickly. It means that you're going to need to rebalance sooner rather than later. You get a lot of benefit of rebalancing, all right, when the weights in the portfolio are unstable, okay, and so you'll rebalance more often because you remove this risk that the weights shoot off and leave you with a portfolio that's very different to the long-term optimal portfolio. Now, rebalancing sooner, removing that risk, that risk growing and you having a lot of benefit from rebalancing because you're removing that high risk, that means you would set narrow corridor widths, all right? You'd want to rebalance more often, all right? You'd rebalance more often if you have narrow corridor widths. Okay, so now, and by the way, you don't have to make this connection. This is kind of like teaching now, but you don't have to make this connection in the exam because this is what's in the curriculum. You have to just recall and be on top of this information. So now the answer, hopefully, is not too far away. Because when you look at equities, all right, oh, by the way, this is a key driver. If the weights in the portfolio are unstable, the risk is higher. The other thing that's relevant here, that is very relevant here, is the benefits of rebalancing, which is removing that risk, which is higher for unstable weights, need to outweigh the costs of rebalancing. All right? Now, whilst the benefits of rebalancing are removing this risk of weights shooting away and leaving you with a non-optimal portfolio, the costs of rebalancing are a bit more explicit. All right? They're transaction costs. You know, okay, I mentioned them as explicit. They could be both explicit commissions and implicit kind of market impact, but they're just transaction costs that you suffer by trading in the market. Now, the general idea is that if the transaction costs for equities are going to decrease, that lowers the cost of rebalancing. So the benefits of rebalancing are going to outweigh the costs of rebalancing sooner. All right? Now, so if you're going to rebalance sooner, you can afford to have narrower corridor widths. You can afford to rebalance more often. Okay? So now you need to think about how you put that into the exam question. All right? Into your answer to the exam question. Okay? Here is one iteration of it. Okay? Transaction costs for equity will decrease, reducing the cost of rebalancing, supporting narrow corridor widths. There you go. That's the point I was making based on that first factor. See how we've lifted something out of the case, all right? And we're referencing it in our answer, and we're really justifying in our exam that this transaction cost being lower reduce the cost of rebalancing so we can afford to rebalance more frequently. It's likely that the benefits of rebalancing will outweigh the cost of rebalancing more often, so we can afford to have narrower corridor widths. Now, going back to this point, weights in the portfolio being unstable, meaning that there's higher risk of a non-optimal portfolio, so we have to rebalance sooner, so we have narrower corridor widths. We'll have a look at this. Your curriculum knowledge, you know that this forecast increase in correlation here, this is the second bullet point, the forecast increase in correlation between fixed income and equities, what impact is that going to have on your weights in the portfolio? What impact is that going to have? If they tend to suddenly start moving more in line with each other, then the weights, when they're both up, they're both up. When they're both down, they're both down. Weights are going to be more stable, right, in your portfolio. So if weights are more stable in your portfolio, there's less urgency about rebalancing. There's less risk that the weights will shoot off, leave you with a non-optimal portfolio, which damages or impairs your ability to meet your long-term objectives. So the key thing here is that the correlation between these two asset classes picking up means that weights are going to be more stable. That means we can afford to have wider corridor widths. We don't need to rebalance as often. Okay? So you'll see in the guideline solution, there you go, the increase in correlation between equities, fixed income, all right? Yeah, lowers the chance of diverting from target rates. It makes your weights more stable, and that supports wider corridors. Now that's what you knew you wanted to find anyway. You knew that Kinloch said that we were unsure about the impact of these factors on the corridor width for equity. It doesn't take much sense to, it doesn't take much common sense really to think, well, in that case, one of them is probably going to say wider, and the other one's probably going to say narrower. Right? And suddenly the answer's right in front of you, as long as you can articulate it. These words here, you don't have to use exactly these words, but you do need to take the curriculum knowledge about correlations and stability of weights, transaction costs, and apply it to what's in front of you, Kinloch and this particular portfolio. But let me just say, if you can locate this material in your curriculum in your head, this question is really boilerplate. Now, do you remember what they said about commodities? Do you remember what Kinloch said about commodities? The volatility of commodities will increase, and Kinloch said that suggests that we should have a narrower corridor width for commodities. Now, you're home really with this. You could probably do this now. Oh, well, if commodities just picks up in terms of volatility, its weight becomes more unstable. And if its weight becomes more unstable, then we're going to need narrower corridor widths. So Kinloch is correct. So make sure you justify it correctly. If the commodity weight is going to become more unstable, the risk that it deviates from the policy portfolio suddenly is increased. We get more benefit from rebalancing, so we'll set narrower corridor widths. We'll rebalance more often and have narrower corridor widths. Okay? So look, you'll see the slide articulating that response for commodities. Here it is. Increased volatility of commodities making it more likely there's going to be a divergence leading to greater potential losses, all right, or deviation from the optimal portfolio, losses versus your objectives. This supports the conclusion of a narrow corridor width. And there you go. Now don't forget, that was only 6 minutes for the full question, but it's your task to go through the curriculum, to really absorb this knowledge, and it's not technically demanding. Once you've got the idea, you can really just memorization is the challenge, all right? But then it's all about taking that information and applying it to the case in front of you. If you can do that, you'll find that level 3 is, you're going to get the same result at level 3 as you did with the other 2 levels. All right, so just to wrap up, folks, this is where the sweet spot is, okay? You'll learn this as you're going through your question practice. Answer the question in front of you, access the curriculum sort of from your studies, all right, from in here, and make sure you can apply it to the case in front of you. Reference the case, justify why what you're saying answers the question, all right, and be sound on the curriculum material itself. And to wrap up, I'll just re-emphasize, I think I said it before, it was kind of wrapped up as a nugget in a lot of advice earlier on. And that is, and you know this at level 3, you already know this, how fair the CFA program is. It's fair. If you get your head down and your chin up, right? If you commit in seriousness to the level 3 program and you partner with us, you are going to be in a very, very strong position, okay? And you should get the same result as what you got at the previous 2 levels. In other words, let's not wish you good luck and ask, wait for the gods of fortune to smile upon you. Let's just emphasize here that in the end, the people that have done the work here productively get the result that they wanted, okay? So good luck, folks. I will see you along the way in your program, in a few of the videos along the way, and maybe, you never know, face-to-face or online. But thank you for tuning in today. I wish you all the best with your studies, and it's hard not to say good luck, but happy studying.